Hello and welcome to another Royal Reviewer live pop-up chat, and today we are going to be talking about the Queen's wealth. As always, this is a live chat, so I'm going to be answering as many viewer questions as I possibly can on this subject. So without further ado, I think I should go and actually find the live chat. So I'm going to type in my name here on the channel and see what comes up. Aha, here we go. So I'm hoping as many of you as possible are able to drop in. Let me just see. Right, I think we have a couple of people watching live at the moment. Again, as always, it's up to YouTube whether they send out notifications and if they are reaching you. So, today's topic. Now, every year we have a publication in the UK called the Sunday Times. Now, they have been compiling a rich list, which is a list of the wealthiest Britons for a very, very long time. This is a very, very well established and well respected list in terms of trying to judge how much our wealthiest citizens are worth. Now, going back to when I was a teenager, and I'm in my 30s now. I used to read it every year. My parents would always have the Sunday Times Rich List. I would always scour through it and be really, really interested in who was at the top of the list, or which members of the aristocracy were there, which billionaires, foreign billionaires. It's really, really interesting. They have their own formulas going on about how they can kind of assess people's wealth. Now, going back to when I was a teenager, roughly when I was about 16, the Queen's net wealth included the Crown estates, the Crown jewels, and they used to count the Queen's wealth as being everything. And they stopped doing that because it was not her private wealth. So, years and years and years and years ago, back when I was about 16, they estimated the Queen's wealth to be round about, I think it was over 100 billion pounds, and that was back then. In fact, they had her as the wealthiest woman in Europe, the wealthiest person in Europe, in fact. But as I say, at some point, and I do forget the year, they stopped including the Crown estates, the Crown jewels, anything of that nature, because that is in fact held in trust by the monarch for the nation. It is not the monarch's personal wealth. So when you hear, and I've got an estimate here, publications like Forbes describing the Queen's wealth as being round about 88 billion, that is incorrect. If you take into account the wealth of the monarchy, the British Crown, yes, it probably is worth about 88 billion, maybe even more. It could be worth even more. The royal family are very, very wealthy, very, very wealthy, but you cannot include that 88 billion as part of the Queen's personal wealth. It is not. The Crown estates, the Crown jewels, the Queen cannot sell. They are held in trust for the nation. So, year on year, ever since then, I've always been tracking how much the royals are worth, and obviously in particular the Queen. So this year, for 2020, the Sunday Times Rich List has estimated the Queen to be worth £350 million, and that is in fact 20 million down on last year. Now that is said to be a direct result of personal investments. Now the Queen does hold a very large stock and property portfolio. Now obviously with what's been going on in the world right now, stocks have fallen across the board. So this is not just a trend for the Queen losing 20 million pounds worth of investments. This is a trend for the wealthiest Britons. There has been a decrease in value of how much many of them are worth. So the Queen in this situation will probably likely just hold on to those stock investments. She probably won't sell any of her portfolio. She'll probably just keep it and, obviously like most people are doing, hoping that it will go up in time. But 20 million, is a lot of money. but it's a kind of a drop in the ocean for the Queen, who is still worth, with her own private stamp collection, her own private jewellery such as the tiaras that she wears, but not the crown jewels, her private art collection, private property portfolio such as Sandringham and Balmoral. Of course, Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle are part of the crown, so although the royal family has access to them, that is not included as part of the Queen's wealth. So Sandringham, Balmoral, those are properties that are included. So yes, the Queen is down on last year. Now, at this point in the video, I want to see if any of you have any questions about what I've said. Has what I've said made any sense? So hello to all of you that I can see in the room right now. Hello to all the channel members whose names are appearing in green in the live chat. So if you're watching on replay, any of the names you can see showing up in green are channel members. So thank you so much for supporting me beyond watching the videos in this time, in this day and age. It really does help. So thank you so much. Right, H. London says, you have worked hard to help us understand the wealth and holdings of the Queen and the monarchy. Thank you. Chiming in says, of course, she is wealthy beyond belief. Well, she is. 350 million is not to be sniffed at, but it is not the 88 billion that some publications would have you believe, such as Forbes. Forbes have vastly got that wrong, because they are including the crown jewels and the vast crown estates. You cannot include that when you are estimating just the private wealth of the Queen. 88 billion is wildly incorrect. Right, and I do have some things to read to you about how the monarchy gets its income. I have spoke about this at various points throughout many videos, but I thought it would be useful to kind of have it all in one particular video. So the finances of the British royal family come from a number of sources, and I've got them down as being the sovereign grant, the Duchy of Lancaster for the Queen, parliamentary annuities, and private income from investment. So the British government supports the monarch and some other members of the House of Windsor, so other members of the royal family, by means of a sovereign grant. Now, it used to be the civil list. So if you hear about the civil list and the sovereign grant make up pretty much the same thing, but there were a number of changes. So it's a sovereign grant at the moment, which is a percentage of the annual profits from the Crown Estate. So remember I said the Crown Estate is a huge investment in property, land, all that kind of thing. It makes an income. That income goes to the government. The government pay 15% of the profits, the surplus, back to the monarchy, and that is paid 2 years in arrears. So, for example, the Queen, what she got for this year from the sovereign grant will be what the surplus, the 15% surplus, was on the profits from 2 years ago, so 2018. But there is another factor as well. Because of all the work that's going on in Buckingham Palace, the government said that because it's going to cost over 100 and something, it might have been 250 million, that the profits, that the percentage would go up to 25% until that work has been completed in 2027, at which point it will revert back to the 15%. So, what is the money used for? It is intended to meet the cost of the sovereign's official expenditures. So, the monarchy, the Queen, does not keep that money. So I've got it down. The income from the sovereign grant from 2 years in arrears, and that includes the extra money for the resurfacing of Buckingham Palace, came to 82.2 million that she received this year from the sovereign grant. But that goes to pay for all of the Queen's official expenditures, which includes the cost of the upkeep of the various royal residences, staffing, travel, and state visits. So the royal family pay for the state visits. That includes such things as those big set-piece state banquets. and also official entertainment. So other sources of income include revenues from the Duchy of Lancaster, as I mentioned, and a parliamentary annuity, which I will explain a little bit later. So I'm going to skip over the civil list. That was the old system. But the sovereign grant came into act in 2011, and it is, as I said, a system of funding the royal household by a mixture of civil list payments and grants in aids, which was replaced from 2012, and a single annual sovereign grant has been paid by the Treasury since then. The level of funding for the royal household is now linked to the government's revenue from the Crown estates. And as I said, that is 15%, but it's 25% until the work on Buckingham Palace has been completed. And there isn't really anything else that I found on that to tell you. Now, the Queen's private income is from the Duchy of Lancaster. Prince Charles, you may have heard, you may already know about the Duchy of Cornwall. There are two. There's the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall. They are kind of passed on. So the next monarch, i.e. Charles, will get his income from the Duchy of Lancaster. When he is king, the Duchy of Cornwall will go to Prince William. And that is how the private incomes are funded of the monarch, the sovereign, and the heir. So the Duchy of Lancaster is the private estate of the British sovereign. Now is Queen Elizabeth II, consisting of land holdings and other assets. As it is held in perpetual trust, that's being passed on for future generations of sovereigns, the sovereign is not entitled to the estate's capital, which means they cannot sell any of it. So any capital assets cannot be sold. The revenue profits of the duchy are presented to the sovereign each year and form part of the privy purse, providing income for both the official and private expenses of the monarch. So, if, for example, the sovereign grant does not quite meet all of the expenditure, money from the Duchy of Lancaster will also be used, but also it funds private expenses, so private wardrobe, private travel, that kind of thing. So I have a financial year ending for 2015. So obviously that will be more now in 2025 years on. But the Duchy of Lancaster was valued at 472 million. And in 2015, that provided 16 million pounds of income for the Queen. But that may be 16 to possibly 20 million in today's money. So, in 2017, there was a little bit of a scandal. The Paradise Papers revealed that the Duchy of Lancaster, so these are financial advisors representing the Queen, invested a number of the Queen's investments in offshore financial centres, such as the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. And obviously, as soon as that was discovered, the Queen obviously, through her financial people working to control those investments, repaid anything that was questionable, shall we say. So I'm not going to talk about the Duchy of Cornwall. That is the Prince of Wales's private income. Now, parliamentary annuities. So, the Duke of Edinburgh receives round about £400,000 per year from the Treasury for all the work that he was doing as the Duke of Edinburgh prior to himself retiring. And I do believe that he still retains a small office, so he still does receive a parliamentary annuity. So in the past, other lower down members of the British royal family, who are also working members of the royal family, received funding in the form of parliamentary annuities. So that included at the time, for example, Princess Margaret, the Queen's cousins, and also at one point it was the Princess Royal and the Duke of York and the Earl and Countess of Wessex. However, by the way, in 2002 there were 8 recipients of parliamentary annuities, and they received a combined amount of £1.5 million a year. So the Queen voluntarily refunded the cost of these annuities in 2012, and then the Sovereign Grant Act abolished all of those parliamentary annuities apart from the Duke of Edinburgh's. So subsequently, all of the living costs, the private living costs of the members of the family who actually are classed as working royals who carry out official duties on behalf of the Queen, who include the Princess Royal, the Duke of York, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex. All of their income, all of that money is now met through the Queen's private income of the Duchy of Lancaster. So the Queen privately funds them. And that is basically all of how the monarch, how the sovereign, the Queen, gets her money. I have obviously left out the private wealth of the Queen. So as I mentioned earlier, the Queen does have private investments, including stock and land, a private art collection, stamp collection, jewellery collection. So obviously any investment. Oh, also she also makes money from horse racing. I think she's won over £10 million in horse racing, so she does get other money from her portfolio. Now, as I said, the royal collection, the crown jewels, anything from the crown estate are all held assets, held in trust for the nation. So you may be surprised that the Queen is worth 350 million. It is still pounds. It is still an awful lot of money, but it may not be as much as what you initially thought, or indeed were led to believe. So I'm going to go back up and read some comments. Right. Chiming in says, can you put a link for your new subscription? It's on the main page of my YouTube page. Just go to the main page and there should be a join button. So it's all there. H. London says, what does a sovereign grant cost taxpayers on a per capita base? I think it works out, it's over £1 a person. It's not a lot of money. Pat Long says, so that funding goes for upkeep on palaces like Buckingham Palace and Windsor. Yes, it does. Chiming in says, very complicated. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of history with the royal finances. Jaden Phillips says, I read somewhere that if we abolish the monarchy, taxes would go up because the monarch would have to take back the profits from the Duchy of Lancaster. Well, that would be a point. I mean, I know I wasn't going to touch on the civil list, but the reason why we got the civil list, and then obviously the sovereign grant since 2012, was because the Crown estates were actually at one point the private possessions of the monarch, and then that was exchanged. There was a deal done between the sovereign and the British government, and they decided to surrender the profits from the Crown estate to the government in exchange for a one-off payment. Now that payment actually benefited the monarch at the time, but over the years that kind of waned and the Crown estates became more and more valuable. So as the profits rose from the Crown estates, the civil list got increased, but it wasn't quite enough to meet the expenditure of the monarch, of the British monarchy. It is still expensive to run. However, obviously, if we didn't have a monarchy, lots of those expenses would still have to be met just by the government and not by the monarch. So it's kind of a moot point, so to speak of. However, then obviously they decided to switch the civil list payment to the sovereign grant, which is a percentage of the profits on the Crown estate, which have been going up. So you know, it should work in the monarchy's favour. It should give them enough money to be able to carry out what the job actually requires, which on the most part is charity work, state work, you know, visits. It's work that is really important for the nation. However, yes, there is, you know, a legal question of if, for example, they abolish the monarchy and that deal was in effect renegade on, if that deal was kind of taken back, should then the Crown estates become a private wealth of the monarch? And in that case, the personal wealth would be 88 billion or so. But I don't think we're in danger of that happening. Lots of people saying interesting. Thank you so much. Trinette says she isn't a billionaire, but she is worth hundreds of millions. Yes, indeed, she is. Yeah, Chanel, if you exit the live chat, the red join button is next to Royal Reviewer and my picture. If you go to the main channel page, there should be a join button. And yes, it may not show up on certain things like iPads, that kind of thing. So if you have got a laptop, try that. I know I can see it on my phone when I look, and I've got an iPhone, so do go and check. Right, I think I'm going to end it here. I want this video to be quite topic specific, so unless you've got any burning questions, or if you think I've not explained something, fully enough, do let me know. I'll stay around for a couple of minutes while you type your question or your comment. But essentially, that is the wealth of the monarch, of the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, for 2020, an estimated 350 million. Oh, there was one thing before I go that I did want to read. Well, I found quite interesting, if I can find it, because there was somebody who worked for the Queen who made a comment about her private wealth, and I don't know how accurate or not it is. So here we go. So though her personal wealth and income are not known in the exact sense, so the 350, remember, is an estimate by the Sunday Times, Jock Colville, a former private secretary to the Queen when she was Princess Elizabeth, and a director of her bank, Coutts, so he would be, quite well in the know, estimated the Queen's wealth at £2 million in 1971, the equivalent of about £28 million today. An official statement from Buckingham Palace in 1993 called estimates of £100 million grossly overstated. So the Palace official line is that she isn't worth that much money, at least in 1993. However, in 2002, she did inherit her mother's estate. That's Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, which is thought to have been worth about £70 million. So, round about £115 million today. So when you add all those in, you take into account the fact that it's now 2020 and not 1993. With the growth of money and the growth of private investments, the Sunday Times is, I think, in a ballpark figure of accuracy, probably round about 350 million. So I'm going to go with that. I can live with that. I think that's kind of acceptable. So H. London says, wonderful, you are the best, thank you, and always have been. Admire your dignity. It's always part of who you are. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, if you have enjoyed this video and found it useful, please give it a big old thumbs up. Don't forget to share on social media, and also do hit the bell so that you know whenever I upload a new video. Also subscribe, it really does help. We are only 500 away from finally reaching 100,000 subscribers on the channel. And also, if you are able to support beyond watching the videos, I do have a Patreon. The link should be in the description. And I also have, through YouTube, the channel memberships, which should be that join button. So do go and check that out if you are able. So from me in Shropshire, mwah to you all, stay safe and goodbye.